Hi, I'm Kathy Smith, and welcome to On Health, the Art of Living, where each week I bring you the latest information on how to live a great life, how to be healthier, more vibrant, and a more passion-driven life. Now, I'm thrilled today to have one of our most popular podcast guests, Dr. Felice Gersh. She's been on the show before, and we've talked about intermittent fasting, but now she's got something great. She's launched a new book called Menopause, 50 Things You Need to Know. It's a fantastic overview about what you go through during menopause. Now, I asked my Facebook group what topics in the book they'd be most interested in discussing, and their answers came back loud and clear. Their top concerns are about weight gain and body shape change, about sex drive and how it decreases as we age, about joint pain and appetite fluctuations. So, understanding why and how of menopause empowers you to take more charge of this journey. The book is full of all kinds of information that can tell you what to expect and what you can do about the major symptoms during the three stages of menopause: pre, menopause, and post. So let me tell you about Dr. Felice. We've had her on the show. I love her to death. She is brilliant, this woman. She's a board certified OBGYN in integrative medicine. She's the director of Integrative Medical Group in Irvine, and she loves teaching students and residents all across the world. And she loves teaching them about the importance of creating a healthy environment within a female body. So with that, let's welcome Felice. So Felice, welcome to the show again.
Well, thank you. I love being back and talking about this critically important topic to every single woman, whether she's in menopause now or, approaching it in some timeline. Every woman deals with menopause at some time and then for the rest of her life.
And it's good to know that she deals with the menopause, but the family, the kids, the husband, the significant others, everybody else deals with it also, right? So it's a good topic for all of us to just be on the open because it impacts so many people. But let's talk about as I mentioned, we threw this out to the Facebook group, and it seems like menopause and it comes with changes, but also aging comes with changes. So talk to us a little bit about what can be attributed to menopause and what is attributed to aging. And are they sort of combined? Do we sort of combine the two at times?
Absolutely. I can't separate them one bit. And this has been really to the detriment of women, is that so many things that happen to women as they age have been attributed to the number of years a woman has lived rather than to what I think of it as a set of accumulating deficiencies. And it starts with the deficiency of hormones. The primary, we'll say at the top of the pyramid, is estrogen in the form of estradiol that's made by the ovaries, which of course cease to make this hormone, and the progesterone that is sort of its sidekick as women progress through the menopausal transition and thereafter. And when you lose this production of estrogen, you really lose your sense of metabolic homeostasis, which is really about the production, distribution, and storage of energy. And of course, the form of energy that we take in is food, right? So it's about how your body utilizes food to create energy. And that affects every single organ system in the body. And when you have problems involving metabolism and each organ system is in some way impaired to some degree, you end up getting a host of other deficiencies involving nutrient deficiencies, other hormonal deficiencies in the sense that the hormones themselves may not work essentially the same because the receptors are now modified in some way. So the hormones don't work on the target receptor in the same way. So as you age, you accumulate this sort of just vast array of deficiencies, which contribute to a problem in every single organ system. And we need to think of aging in that sense, rather than just how many years have you lived, but how many deficiencies have you accrued?
Okay, well, let's talk about deficiencies as it relates to weight gain. So let's get back to the weight gain and also this idea of body shape. Like, women gain weight, but they also say, my body just seems to be changing, where the fat or where where everything's distributed. So what's happening inside that causes that?
Well, it turns out that estrogen is the key player in terms of metabolism, which, as I mentioned, is about energy utilization, distribution, which of course relates to adipose tissue or fat. So every girl knows that as she is going through puberty, her body changes and in all sorts of interesting ways, and fat starts to be deposited in very female ways, like around the hips and the butt, and she gets a little waistline, and that's all estrogen driven. So when you lose estrogen, you go into this sort of default state, which is belly fat. So every woman will see to some degree her body morphing in this very undesirable way. As she loses her cute little hourglass figure, she loses her little waistline, and instead she starts getting the muffin top. She gets this belly fat and loses her waistline. And this fat is also involving the visceral organs, the internal organs. And this is highly inflammatory fat. It gets infiltrated with white blood cells that are then triggered to produce all their inflammatory products, like inflammatory cytokines, that create this chronic state of low-level inflammation that drives many of the detriments involved with aging that we think about. And that is a huge deal for women. And so having this alteration in fat in terms of its distribution is only the visible signs that are happening, because under the surface, literally under the surface, the fat tissue, which is very complex, it's now understood that adipose tissue is not just about cushioning or about energy storage, it's also a complex endocrine organ, and it makes different types of hormones. For example, one hormone that's made by adipose tissue is called adiponectin. This particular hormone is also driven by estradiol, estrogen from the ovaries, to help us to burn fat. So after menopause, you actually have sort of we'll say, a handicap in the ability to create energy from fat. You don't actually do it as well as you used to. And the default position, if you don't burn fat, is to store fat. So after menopause, you're more prone to maintaining that fat on your body. It makes it so hard to lose it. In addition, another hormone that's controlled by estrogen in large measure that's made by fat tissue is leptin, which you may have heard of. And leptin actually lowers appetite. So it helps regulate appetite. So after menopause, you don't have proper production and function of this critical hormone, leptin. So then you develop more appetite dysregulation, which leads to cravings and binges and so many of the problems that are associated with additional weight gain. So it's like the multi-whammy situation where you have the default of belly fat being accumulated, you don't burn fat and create energy well, and you lose your appetite regulation. And that's just the beginning of what happened. So, every woman I see comes in and said, I don't know what's happening. I'm actually exercising more. I'm cutting back on what I'm eating, and I keep gaining weight in these really undesirable locations. And now it's all about the loss of this vital hormone, estradiol. And that just is something really important for all women to know, is that everything in the body of a female, whether we want it or not, this is what nature gave us. It's designed for the purpose of optimal survival and optimum reproductive success. And like, for example, you want to have fat, right, if you're going to have a baby. So pregnancy is actually a bit of a pro-inflammatory state. Anytime you develop more inflammation, you're going to have more insulin resistance and you're going to put on more body fat. Well, menopause is also a pro-inflammatory state, but with a different end. It's not to help create fat stores so that you can feed a baby when you're nursing. Here, when you lose your estrogen, it's a little different scenario, but you get a similar outcome. You get a chronic state of inflammation that never ends. You don't deliver any baby that ends it. And then you end up getting this lifetime, or the rest of your lifetime, difficulty in burning fat and fat accumulation. And all of this happens that promotes then the cardiovascular diseases that are still the number one killer of women as they age.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So I love that description. Let's go back. Couple things. In the book, again, as a reminder, you go through 50 different oh changes that
Yeah,
women go through. But what I like about the way it's laid out, and I want to emphasize this, is that you not only talk about why it's happening, but then you talk about ways to treat it or prevent it. So I want to make sure that we talk right now about with the weight gain and the body changes. I want to talk about how we can prevent that, how, what else we can be doing. I know we'll probably jump into intermittent fasting if I'm not mistaken for a
right.
second. But then I want to move on into also this idea, and so I don't want to forget about it, about the inflammation and and all the other changes that are happening in your body. But let's start with, just stay with the weight gain and the body change. What should we be doing?
Well, one of the things that also everything sort of interrelates, everything is interconnected. And one of the other things that also impairs our metabolism, our ability to burn fat, is a loss of proper regulation of our circadian rhythm. And that's related to the master clock that sits in the brain atop the optic nerve and senses light and also nutrient status. And this is actually also in large measure controlled by estrogen. And so after menopause, women actually essentially are living like a life of jet lag. And when we live a life of jet lag, we also promote this dysfunction of our metabolic homeostasis, our ability to properly regulate energy metabolism. So one of the really, I call it the backdoor way of helping to regulate metabolism and get our weight under control during the menopause years is to use the clock genes that are embedded in virtually every cell in our body. And they can be controlled by the time you eat and also whether you're eating or not, which actually acts as sort of a gut reset. And the gut microbiome, that's why, I mean, it gets so complex, but the gut microbiome changes as well as you go into menopause. And you get more of an abnormal microbiome, which causes leaky gut, which then promotes even more inflammation. So it's like a feed forward, sort of a snowball
Yeah,
effect. Right. So,
exactly. And by the way, on the show, we've had, Dr. Zach Bush, and we've had Dr. William Bolsowicz, Dr. B. So we've talked a lot about the gut
right.
microbiome, but I feel like we can never talk enough about it because it's one of those things that just for me, between the brain, body, entire connection of well-being, when I turned on to really targeted my gut health, I saw major changes in my vitality, in my body composition after menopause. So it really is an important point. But let's just talk about the intermittent fasting. Let's
Right.
stick with that for a second. And the
Right.
one thing I do want to tell you, Felice, you are responsible, my darling, for getting me to move back my dinner hour by 15 to 30 minutes every day, not every day, but over a period of time. So now I thought I could never do it. When I interviewed you a year ago, I thought it was not possible. And now my biggest meal of the day is usually sometime before 4 o'clock,
Wow.
which for me, I know. And that the exceptions are, their exceptions are probably 2 days a week when I'm going out, let's say. But even then, I have my bigger meal and I have a smaller meal when I go out. And that's because of you. And I thought there's no
Yay.
way that I could do that. So, and it's made a huge difference with my sleep.
Well, it is, and we're going to get into that. So, what I wanted to tell all of your audience is that those little microbes that live in our gut, this doesn't get talked about enough. They also have clock genes, and they don't know what time it is, but they can actually function better if you feed them on a schedule. So you're going to get a better gut reaction, a better gut microbiome, and reduce that leaky gut if you feed your little best friends those microbes, those trillions of microbes on a time schedule. And they actually do much better in terms of making melatonin if you don't feed them at night. And they were just amazing in that they have, like every living creature on earth, they have clock genes. And so by timing your eating, so we call it time restricted eating, when you eat by the clock, eat to the beat, I say. So you stop eating early, you have that long fast, at least 13 hours from dinner to breakfast. and then you stop snacking. So every time you eat, you're going to put in food that's going to in some way negatively impact your blood sugar and your insulin. And so you don't want to have elevated insulin throughout the day because insulin, which is vital, insulin is vital to our survival. But if you have chronically elevated insulin, you're going to promote fat production and storage all the time. So you got to get your insulin down and your blood sugar down into just sort of that quiet baseline level. So you only eat no more than 3 times a day. If you get advanced, you could even have 2 meals a day where you're not doing caloric restriction or nutrient deprivation at all. You're just combining your food. You're just combining your food into like 2 or 3 times a day and stop snacking altogether. And if you absolutely have to snack, it should be something that is least likely to elevate your blood sugar, something that is predominantly fat, like
Like
olive.
olives, like if I have a snack,
Exactly. If you,
olives or some almonds or something
right,
that,
the fattiest.
but you're right. I mean, that's still, I think my 2022 goal is still the snacking thing. I'm still,
Yeah.
I intermittent fast. I have no problem with the 13, 14 hours between dinner and breakfast. There's no problem there. It's just that I like to put things in my mouth, but I do when I feel so much better. My gut feels so much better. When honestly,
Right.
I'm the 2 meals a day, and if I have to have something in between that, to your point, it's some olives or almonds or something like that. And then my brain function, my weight, I see the clarity in my eyes. I see I'm not retaining water the same way. So very powerful. The snacking thing is something that I think we can all discuss more because
Right.
intermittent fasting, we think of it so much as this long break between meals, which it is, but we don't talk enough about, don't be putting things in your mouth. Do you recommend a blood glucose monitor?
I use
Maybe.
them. I do recommend them all the time. There's actually some published data saying that if you don't have diabetes, it may not be as useful as if you do have diabetes. But I find it's helpful because we now know that the individual's gut microbial makeup can actually determine the glucose response of specific foods. So it's like the most ultimate in personalized precision medicine to find out what specific foods have what effect on your blood sugar elevation. And so I think it's useful. It also makes people kind of aware and thinking about what they're eating. So I think that's useful too. And it's important for people to know that it's sort of like the total makeup of the food that often has the effect. And that's why we want to make sure that every meal has got all the different types of food groups and the optimal amounts of polyphenols and antioxidants so that our bodies will have the proper response. But I do use a lot of them, and I think it helps people to sort of become much more aware of what they're consuming and when. Because if you got to keep checking your blood sugar, you're going to think, do I really want to eat this? So,
That's true.
anything that, it's going to make you be really aware is going to be very helpful. And so we need to think of fasting in many ways. Every time you're not eating, technically you're fasting. So the 24-hour day, when we decide when we're going to eat and when we're going to fast, is part of what we would call time restricted eating. And then if we have multi-day fasts, or my favorite, which would be a fasting mimicking diet, because it's much more practical to get people to do that than to just do a water fast, that gives you a different type of a benefit where if you multi-day fast, you can trigger what's called autophagy, which is also estrogen related. So many people don't realize that autophagy, which is a cellular rejuvenation process, it's kind of like cellular rehab. You're going to like work to optimize the individual's health of every cell in your body is also very essential and won't come into play unless you have a longer fast, like usually closer to 3-4 days of fasting. And then you get this amazing process called autophagy, and also where you trigger apoptosis, which is killing off those yucky old pro-inflammatory senescence or aging cells. So everything in the body is about, like the Chinese got it right. I don't know how they were so smart, the yin yang, and a lot of cultures have this sort of balance, push, pull, hot, cold, and eat, not eat. So it's really important. And in women who are transitioning into menopause, because they have this menopausal related metabolic challenge, we'll call it, right? That they need to pull every trick out of the hat, right? To optimize their ability to use energy properly so that they can burn the fat and not just, it's a different skill set to make fat and store fat than to burn fat. And we don't want to get dependent on just burning glucose because that's the easiest one. But, in order to burn fat, you've got to get your insulin, like I say over and over, you got to get your glucose and insulin down into those baseline healthy levels in order to trigger fat burning. And by combining time restricted eating, where you don't eat many times during the day, you get that multi-hour fast at night. And then you combine it with some multi-day fasting where you can do a water fast for 3 or 4 days or the fasting mimicking diet. Then you'll get extra help. And we now have, there's published articles on the fasting mimicking diet that it really can help with weight loss. And this is so important. And we need to get more studies involving menopausal women because it's really a unique population. But I've seen it in my own practice where it is so beneficial. Certainly, that's what I do for myself because I'm in that category.
And
Yeah.
it's powerful, and I'm glad you brought it up because we've had Walter Longo on the show, and we've talked about the fasting mimicking diet, and I like to do it. I'm actually going to do one in January,
Mhm.
and I like about every 6 to 9 months, I will go on. I do the 3 to 4 day
Mm.
basically because of my body and the amount of weight I have, and I don't want to lose a lot of weight,
Right.
etc. But for me, it's not about weight loss. To your point, it's that it feels like every cell in my body is
Mhm.
regenerating. But I'm glad you brought it up, and we'll put it in the liner notes. And if
Right.
anybody wants to reach out and ask me anything more about that, before we get off this though, what blood glucose monitor are you recommending?
Well, I usually use the Freestyle Libre. That's like the most readily available. They have it at all the different drugstores, and sometimes, not always, it's going to be covered by insurance, but it's quite affordable. So the Freestyle Libre is the one that I utilize the most, and there are others on the market. And they're very simple to use. And everyone can try it. At least, it's like the best kind of self biohacking that there is to kind of see
I
how
like
your blood sugar reacts. And so it's really great. And then when you combine this nutritional type of an approach, and of course, the food that you eat matters greatly. We know that if you eat foods that are filled with antioxidants and polyphenols, so that's basically a plant heavy diet focused on all kinds of plants, and you eat foods that are highly filled with different types of fiber so that's the food that the lovely little microbes like to ferment, you're going to get much better results. Obviously, eating a standard processed American diet is of that kind of food is not going to do. And, it becomes worse. And then when you add in exercise, I mean, you cannot talk about weight control and fat distribution on the female body and not bring up exercise. And there's now data that if you exercise in the morning, you're more prone to losing weight. And you can even exercise on a fast, but then have breakfast afterwards. And that will also definitely help rev up your metabolism. And then sleep is so essential. If people who are not menopausal at all, if they don't get enough sleep, they're going to gain weight because you just have to get sleep. It's very important for every function in your body. Your immune system is quite different at night than it is during the day. Our metabolism is different at night than in the day. Our hormones are different. Blood flow is different. So we definitely need to work on sleep hygiene. That means like doing all the things to help us to relax so that we can fall asleep, make the environment in our bedroom to be ideal for sleep. Make the room really dark. In fact, melatonin is such a critical hormone, and it's involved not just in sleep and as a potent antioxidant, but we now know it's heavily related to glucose metabolism, which is so important when you're talking about maintaining weight and basic overall body health in every situation, in every organ system. So we have to focus on the fundamentals more than ever when we're going into menopause as women to maintain every aspect of our health.
Well, speaking of fundamentals and speaking of sleep, this is a great segue into what else you could do in the bedroom, which is sex. But so many women, and in our poll, they say their libido just seems out of sync with their partners, and it can be distressing. And we know that there are many barriers to intimacy when it comes to a female's, female sexuality. And it can be exhaustion, it can be stress. The libido is very, very complex. But what really starts to happen, because I've actually had men come up to me and start talking to me about their wives, and asking what they can do because they feel that they feel their wives don't want to have sex with them anymore. They feel like they've lost that connection. So tell us what's going on and what we can do about it.
Well, nature really is not interested. Once you recognize, like I mentioned, that it's all about optimal survival for the purpose of procreation, and which is not going to happen once you're in menopause. So nature kind of just doesn't really have a plan. So we have to create our own plan, because the natural course of things is for libido to go down as women age. But we don't want that. As humans, we really want to be determining most every aspect of our life. So what can we do? Honestly, I am very much in favor of hormone therapy. We know that this has not been discussed as much as it should be, that estrogen is actually very key to having a sexual drive for women and sexual response. And estrogen also is very involved with oxytocin, which is it's sort of like a hormone slash peptide, which is really about the length of the amino acid chains, but it's a little signaling agent that is very involved in creating love and bonding and also orgasms. And you need to have proper estrogen. Now, no matter what we do, even when we take hormones and we take estrogen, and I'll talk in a moment about testosterone too, because they work in beautiful synergy, we're never going to be the same like we're 25. So we once again have to pull every trick out of the toolbox. And another one is eating foods that are phytoestrogen. So that is like an amazing thing that nature gave us. Foods that actually can bind to our estrogen receptors. And there was an interesting study just a couple of months or so ago that showed that if a woman ate organic whole soy about a cup a day, so this could be edamame or tofu, that in the course of 12 weeks, almost all the night sweats and hot flashes, which is definitely a libido killer, and a huge percentage of women will suffer from night sweats and hot flashes, and then they don't sleep. It's just misery. And they found that in women who didn't even take hormones, that if they ate this is really a phytoestrogen, and you could try flax seeds, that type of thing. Even pomegranates have an effect on estrogen receptors, and it tremendously helped. So we can use food as one of our main weapons to fight all the negative effects on our sex drive and night sweats and hot flashes so that we can feel sexy. And also when, of course, we have a self-esteem. When we look in the mirror and we don't really feel repulsed, we say, I like myself, right? And we feel good about how we look and how we feel. That's going to really have a big impact. Women do not feel sexy and have a sex drive when they're chronically tired. And that is a big thing that women face because they really don't sleep well. So it gets back to sleep. So having proper nutrition and sleep, all of those things are going to help a body, self-esteem, are all going to go a long ways. But even in the presence of those things, which usually come as a package deal, our hormones are declining, and that really affects the actual mechanisms involved in female sexual arousal and response. So estrogen in the form of hormone replacement therapy, using topical estradiol as a patch, a gel, a cream, and combining it always with progesterone, which also has many wonderful effects and helps us to sleep better. And it's great for our brains. It's very neuroprotective. And then we add in the proper foods. We can actually do a great deal of good. Now, testosterone also, of course.
Before you jump
Sure.
to testosterone, though, let me just ask you, I know there's been controversy over the last 20 years. So I wrote my book on menopause, moving through menopause. Wow, it's going on 20 years ago. And I was on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And Oprah was, I had, shot my book up to New York Times bestseller. But part of the reason why Oprah was so into it at that point, because she was having heart palpitations,
Mm.
and it was misdiagnosed. Because we weren't talking about this as much, we still
Mhm.
are confusing certain of these symptoms in our lives. So before you go into jump into testosterone, way back then, I interviewed 8 doctors on to hormone replace or not, and it was, I cannot tell you, Felice, it was split down the middle
Mm.
to the extremes, and then the Women Health Initiative came out, and then they shut the study down
Mhm.
because of certain aspects, which we know about,
Yeah.
and we understand the background of that now. But now I understand from your book and what I'm reading that it's switched, and the pendulum now has swayed back to, good hormone replacement, if done properly, can be very, very helpful. And sounds like that's where you believe and where you stand on the subject.
Right. It's, once you recognize women go through menopause at different ages, I mean, within a certain spectrum, but it could be in the total normal realm of the timing. It could be age 45, it could be age 55, it could be age 57. So basically, a woman could go, one healthy, considered normal spectrum woman in terms of menopause could go into menopause a decade before another woman. So does that mean the woman who has her own natural hormones for another decade, those hormones suddenly became evil? Of course not. The problem was when they did the Women's Health Initiative, and the people who were the head and lead investigators have backtracked a lot, just not loudly enough, which is really sad. They used hormones that are never present in a human female body. A hormone is just, it depends how you define hormone. If you talk about it as a human bioidentical hormone, they didn't use anything that would be getting that label. If you talk about chemicals that can bind to hormone receptors, which also include, endocrine disruptors like plastics and BPA and phthalates, then yes, they are hormones. So it's really kind of weird. They use things that would never naturally be in a human body. And it turned out that the progestin, which is a made up word for a synthetic, not human progesterone, actually had some really negative effects, really negative, that they could increase the risk of breast cancer and heart disease. And that's what they used. And then the estrogen formulation they used was an oral version of what the horse was trying to get rid of. The pregnant horse is now putting out these conjugated, it means it went through the liver to get rid of it. And it's a whole array of different stuff coming out of a pregnant horse's urine. And they just dried it up and made it into a tablet and they fed it to humans. And it has a totally different effect because when it gets into the female's bloodstream, the human female, it actually is not the same as estradiol. It's not, it's a different compound. And so it binds to the receptors in a different way, and it actually increases blood clotting by 400%. So it increased blood clots, which then can translate into more strokes and into vascular problems, which can then affect brain function. And they used an elderly population, not women. In fact, they excluded women who had night sweats and hot flashes because they figured that they would figure out that they were in the group that was either getting or not getting hormones based on what happened to those symptoms. So it was like a weird population of patients. Many of them had pre-existing cardiovascular disease and were on pharmaceuticals. And it doesn't relate to giving women human bioidentical hormones that are truly the kind that are the same as what the ovary makes, and trying to give it in a way that is somewhat mimicking what the human female body was designed to do, and which is not having the same hormone levels every day, doing this pulse progesterone, which is physiologic. So they did everything wrong in that study with the best of intentions. And then they attributed the results inappropriately, even though their study said the results of this study only apply to what was used. And then they attributed it to every kind of hormone for years and years to come, including human identical hormones. But it poisoned the well so much that people were so afraid of hormones that even the doctors who did some studies later, they used such tiny doses of estrogen that, of course, if it's like you do a study on the benefit of vegetables and you say take one bite of vegetables a month, and then you say, nah, they don't really do anything. It's like, wait a minute, that's a subtherapeutic dose. So they used, even then, many of the studies used oral estrogen, which ends up going into the bloodstream in a different format because it gets altered by the liver. They use progesterone inappropriately. They often used other progestins, which is a made up, kind of synthetic progesterone. So it's all kinds of crazy stuff that was going on. So we now know, though, that the pendulum, like you said, is swinging back as we're recognizing that when you give hormones that are the type that the human body was designed to have, you actually then get the results that you are looking to achieve. And so we know that it's a whole different scenario now, but it's been a long and hard battle and a long road to get to here.
Well, it's interesting. Everything you've said, I want to jump back to testosterone because I know people listening are going to want to hear about testosterone as it relates to sex. But to finish off on estrogen, what is the window? Like, when is there a time period where if you're postmenopausal but you haven't started on any hormone replacement therapy, is there a window that you can still start it? Or if you haven't started after 5 or 6 years, then that window closes?
So the general will say the conventional approach now is a decade. Now, where does that even come from? Well, it comes from some studies which used, once again, the wrong doses, like way too tiny of a dose that achieved levels in the blood of the estrogen that was not much different than a menopausal woman's level. So it was very, very underdosed, and you're not going to get the same effects. So they did not show any harm, by the way, in giving older women the hormones. They just didn't show benefit. But once again, they didn't give adequate dosing. So this is my personal opinion. So the conventional approach is you have a window of 10 years from the time your period stops into when you can get benefits from going on hormone therapy. Now, my personal opinion is that that's bunk. And I'll tell you why. Because the idea is that the estrogen receptors, they no longer work and you already are having problems and you're not going to fix anything. I don't think you're going to get the same degree of benefit because estrogen doesn't make everything turn back. It doesn't turn back the clock and then put you back where you started. But this is what I'm looking at, the vagina. Okay, so the current opinion, this is all conventional approach, is that every woman at every age can benefit from vaginal estrogen therapy at any age, like including like women in their mid-70s or even older, to help reduce recurrent urinary tract infections, irritation, and sexual dysfunction. So if you can get
atrophy,
yes, right. So which now they changed the name. We all call it vaginal atrophy. They changed it to the genitourinary syndrome of the menopause. There are committees that do nothing but change names. It's like, don't you have anything better to do? But, so basically, yes, the vaginal atrophy, and they recommend it at every age, no matter how many years, decades you've been out in menopause. And guess what? You get benefit. The vagina does get benefit.
This is prescription.
This is prescription estrogen, and the vagina gets better.
And the vagina, so that gets back to the sexual. Let's go from the cream to the testosterone. So you get the cream, and now you're revving up the vagina. You're making it more lubricated. I don't even know if it's lubricated, probably not. But
no, it does.
You're adding to the health of the vagina, and then so honestly, I'm not doing any vaginal cream. So would you recommend the patch, or if you're doing the patch, estradiol patch, then you don't need the vaginal cream, or are you recommending both?
If you get the serum levels up to an adequate level, like closer to, it has to be over 50. Okay, if you measure the picograms of estradiol, has to be over 50, preferably getting a little bit closer to 100. In many women, that will be an adequate level to restore the vagina over time. But if you want to jumpstart it, and some women still, depending on the status of the vagina, they need to have more. You can give the local application of estrogen. And the thing about it is that you can give it at any age. And what does that show? It shows that the receptors in the vagina, which are not unique to any other organ system, right? That nature didn't make it so that only the vagina can have benefit from estrogen if you're 20 years out. So to me, if the vagina can benefit from estrogen at any stage of the game, so can every other organ system. So that is why I think that every woman at any stage can still benefit from starting hormones, even if it's late in the game, because the vagina will benefit. Now, the vagina actually will become more lubricated because the way the vagina naturally lubricates is through a process called transudation. So the blood that, is circulating involves both red blood cells and the liquidy part, which is the serum. And that will actually ooze out from the blood vessels through the vaginal wall into the vaginal lumen to create lubrication. But it doesn't work properly if you don't have proper estrogen in the vagina. And in addition, what happens is the lining cells of the vagina, when they have proper estrogen, those lining cells actually make food called glycogen that feeds the vaginal microbe so that you get a healthy vaginal microbiome, which then works in a feed-forward mechanism to improve the health of and protect the bladder, and then to make the vagina more acid. Because what happens is when you have the glycogen made by these healthy, rejuvenated, estrogenized lining cells, the glycogen feeds the microbes that love it, and the healthy ones that are the lactobacilli. And then when they ferment the glycogen, they make lactic acid, which gets the pH of the vagina into an acid pH, which is so important for them promoting more vaginal health. So it's so important. And here's another little trick of the trade. If you use vaginal DHEA, DHEA is an adrenal androgen. So it's made by the adrenal gland, but we can give DHEA. A lot of people use it orally as well, or through the skin as sort of an anti-aging thing because it's anabolic. It builds tissues, muscles, ligaments. In the vagina, it's been shown that it actually thickens and sort of rejuvenates all of the tissues of the vagina, not just the lining cells like estrogen, but also the underlying tissue like the dermis. And in studies that came out of Canada, it showed that it increased sex drive and sexual response. So it's sort of like all around the thing. And so, yes.
And now, is that prescription? Is that a counter?
The best ones would be prescription strength. There is a product that's over the counter, but in order to get, optimal production and sort of standardization, I always use a compounding pharmacy. There's also a prescription one that's a tablet that you can get. Intrinsa, I find the compounded cream to work better in my patients. I can also control the dosing better because then it's customized and I can control the dose better. And I do a loading dose where I give like 10 milligrams of vaginal DHEA cream, and they use it every night for 2 weeks. That's sort of like to get things going. And then I drop it to like maybe 3 times a week. And the nice thing about DHEA is that if it gets on the guy, if there's, a guy involved and it rubs off on him, it's good for him. It's an anabolic steroid that's an androgen, right? So it's good for the guy if it rubs off. We don't really want our estrogen vaginal cream to rub off on the guy, so we got to deal with that issue. But this is like, it's so perfect. The vaginal DHEA cream has really become a mainstay of my practice for sexual rejuvenation and vaginal rejuvenation, how they go together.
Good insight. So I don't want to, I know we are running long here, so I want to make sure we just tackle joint pain for a sec, just a top line on joint pain, which will tie into some of the other things we talked about. But give us just 1 minute on testosterone.
Oh, absolutely. So testosterone declines completely separately from the menopause. In fact, by age 40, the average woman's testosterone is half what it was when she was 20. So nature wants women's sex drive to kind of diminish as she gets into the sort of post, optimal fertile years. But we don't like that once again. So
and it also impacts muscle mass.
It does.
So that's why I'm interested in it, because it starts diminishing. But that's one of the reasons why we need to talk about lifting weights and staying strong and all those other things. And testosterone is a part of that.
Absolutely. Estrogen is very key to bone health, muscle health, ligament health as well. They're both they intersect each other so much. You need and testosterone, because it declines earlier than the estrogen declines, you can start having loss of muscle, that sarcopenia, which is so insidious in women. And we know that fitness status is a vital sign of health. And the status of a woman's fitness, her strength, her agility, her balance, really predicts all-cause mortality in many ways more than, say, her blood pressure, which of course is also very important. So maintaining muscle mass and lean body tissues to be healthy is so critical. And testosterone is definitely a big part of that. And it goes down by age, like I said, by age 40, it's half. So, measuring testosterone, and if you're sort of in the bottom, and nobody knows exactly because the research on women is so limited, but if you're in like the bottom quartile, so you're in like the bottom 25th percentile for the reference range, that is like a red flag. Maybe you would benefit from some testosterone supplementation. But as well, they've shown that women do so amazingly well with weight resistance training, and they maximize the testosterone that they have because they're not going to zero. They're going down, but you can, use the body tissues that you have to really grow them. And they've shown that you can do tremendous benefits for your body by doing weight training for your muscle mass. And this will help you in so many ways. And then estrogen also is going to be like the extra whammy on your musculoskeletal health when you start losing your estrogen. So every woman needs to be aware. And the musculoskeletal system is so under-recognized as critical to a quality of life as well as healthy longevity issue for every woman. So every woman needs to be...
Felice, my tagline on my tagline on my website is "Strong women stay young," and I have to say we talk about strength training over and over. So I'm glad it's music to my ears that you're saying that, because my audience. So let's just, one of the common complaints that came in with the Facebook group was feeling joint pain, is feeling stiff and achy, and old traumas seem to flare up more. Normal activities seem to cause more injuries. So let's talk about joint pain and why menopause and shifting hormones affects our joints.
Well, and this is a sad truth that also doesn't get talked about enough. The vast majority of joint replacements are in women. Women outstrip men in terms of joint injuries and joint replacements. And this is a very big deal, of course, in terms of bone health. And by the way, bones are part of joints. That is sometimes like people think a joint is just ligaments and tendons, but no, joints are always the joining of bones. And the health of the bone actually is critical to the function and health of the joint. And women, of course, have the biggest incidence of osteoporosis. 80% of all osteoporotic fractures are in women. And if you think about, like, for example, a knee joint, you have the cartilage that covers the bone at each end of the joint. And this is true in every joint. There's like the bones. And so you want to have healthy bones, and that involves a healthy diet. So you definitely want to have adequate protein. And as we get older, we need to have more protein in our diet. And this is very important because you got to be able to maintain what you've got and to help fight off the effects of aging and loss of hormones. And then estrogen, so it's involved, of course, in bone health. Almost everyone knows that. But estrogen is also very involved in the ligamentous structure. So the ligaments, the tendons, the elastin. So the elastin is what gives the flexibility. So things bend instead of breaking. And what happens as we age when we have reduced hormones, and testosterone is also, of course, involved. Everything, these are like all working synergistically. And even thyroid hormone, the thyroid hormone receptors are activated by estrogen. So after menopause, women may have normal thyroid levels, but they actually may have low thyroid symptoms because the receptors are becoming more resistant in an absence of estrogen. And all of these tissues are involved with these hormones and their functionality and their health. And as you age, the tissues become less flexible because elastin diminishes, which is very, very related to estrogen levels. So things that used to bend and flex now rip and tear. So a lower threshold exists for trauma to create actual injury. So like people go out and they do Zumba dancing, they do like skiing, they play tennis and pickleball and all these activities that shouldn't be like causing all kinds of injuries. And suddenly they're getting problems with tendinitis and injuries in their ankles and their knees. And it can go down the path of inappropriate surgeries that leads to then joint replacements and other surgeries. Women, for example, make up the vast majority that get what is called frozen shoulder, which is like almost all, it's like 90% female, and they wake up and they can't put their arm over their head. So the musculoskeletal system and the joints are so critical, and women are more sensitive to having injuries and having degradation, osteoarthritis, which is not about just like aging. It's really that the tissues become unhealthy inside and then become inflamed. So we definitely need to be aware that, eating the proper diet, taking collagen supplements is actually beneficial, and making sure that you do have proper training. I recommend that every woman, as she's getting into menopause, that she works with a trained professional, because I see so many women who say, oh my God, I'm getting belly fat, so I'm going to go out and start running and doing more jogging. And the next thing you know, they're in a brace for their knee, and they're ending up having inappropriate surgery. By the way, once you're 50, doing like an arthroscopy on your knee and then, shoveling out, they call it smoothing out, but really it's removal of your cartilage, is like the fast track to getting a knee replacement. And it's like, it's not going to fix a torn meniscus. I'm just telling you, it's just not. So the tissues are already degrading, and you can't fix it, and they actually make things worse. So, be careful about that. So we don't want injury. So working with a professional who's going to really help guide you on getting into the proper exercise, that you're not going to get into trouble and then have joint pain and then injuries that are going to take you down a path where then you won't be able to exercise properly. So that's really important. And it's so, it's underappreciated.
No, I appreciate you saying that. So if you haven't been exercising, to start back slowly, start with, gentle movements. Don't do anything. Don't do anything that's going to overstress your feet, which I see so many people having, foot problems. They jump back to then the knee, the hip. And I've had two friends recently tell me about the frozen shoulder. So let's talk. I love that collagen. You mentioned collagen. We've talked about all the other things that really will, help your body, which is sleep. It is exercise, appropriate exercise, supplementation, maybe with collagen. But when it comes to joints, and especially, let's say, pain and arthritis, are there certain do's and don'ts within the dietary realm that you recommend that we either eat more of or less of?
Well, always a no-no is pro-inflammatory processed foods. So we don't want to have anything that's going to increase systemic or total body inflammation. So we want to have the most anti-inflammatory diet. And that, once again, gets back to foods that have a lot of polyphenols and antioxidants. And these are from the world of plants. So we want to definitely reduce systemic inflammation, because when you have inflammation, it's not just one spot. It's like multiple spots. It's just interesting how some people will sort of have more inflammation in one spot or another, but it's everywhere, okay? And it's in your brain, it's in your joints, it's in your blood vessels, and so on. It just may seem more like it's only in one part, but it's always in all parts. So an anti-inflammatory diet is really critical. So, eating, I love plant-based proteins. So I recommend eating lots of legumes, so that's beans and lentils and nuts and seeds. And there's so much now, coming out on the benefits of plant-based proteins. Now, I'm not in favor of people being long-term vegans, because they end up with a lot of nutrient deficiencies. You have to be really careful about that sort of thing. But, having a little bit of the most optimal, sustainably raised and the best type of animal protein, but not a tremendous amount, like a small amount every day of that. And then we know that for inflammation, it's also very important to have omega-3. So from omega-3 comes what are called SPM, specific pro-resolving mediators. And these are in group called protectins and resolvins. And what they do is that they actually trigger the end of inflammation and pro-healing in the body. But so many people are deficient in the omega-3. So you can get it by eating the omega-3 fatty fishes, like wild salmon, but there isn't enough wild salmon on the planet to feed everybody. Sardines are another source that a lot of people don't like sardines. I grew up with sardines, so I actually like them. And of course, you can do supplementation with omega-3, but you can't actually trigger the resolving, the anti-inflammatory status if you don't have adequate quantities of omega-3 in your body. And so that's really important to have that as a food source, and just of eliminating any processed foods with the especially the pro-inflammatory rancid, we'll call them oxidized oils that you get from all of the commercial foods. Now, there's nothing evil about omega-6, by the way, and omega-6 is the foundation for creating your whole endocannabinoid system, which is really critically important. And they are both pro and anti-inflammatory, like we call them, like the signaling fatty acid signaling agents that are called prostaglandins. Some of them are pro-inflammatory and some of them are anti-inflammatory. So you want to have the healthiest source of fats in your body that you can possibly get. And so if you eat like raw, very fresh nuts, that will be a very healthy source of the omega-6s, which are then used for the body's anti-inflammatory purposes. But if they're rancid, they're already oxidized, they're already going to be stuck in the pro-inflammatory mode. So we definitely want to
So it's having that balance. It's having that
Absolutely.
balance between the omega-6s and 3s, and as you say, like
Healthy.
with the nuts, I know as soon as I open up a can or I'm somewhere, I can smell if those nuts have been overly processed and maybe have gone rancid, or I can taste it right away.
Oh,
So
which is so
the fresher, the better. Well, listen, we could go. I mean, I feel like we just had a doctor's visit. I just feel this is like the best. You are the best. It's like to go through this podcast and all of the tidbits and little moments that we talked about are such powerful recommendations that you gave to the audience. I just really have to thank you for that. And we are going to remind everybody about the book. I'm going to pull it down here, but I have the name. But there's a tagline here that
here, I have it. Can I pick it up? I have a copy right here.
Yeah, put it in front of the audience. Let's do it.
It's a nice little compendium.
Put it closer to the camera, the lens. Put it closer. Just so, yeah. Bring it down a little bit. Okay, 50. Okay, there we go. 50 things you need to know. Menopause. I went through it. I have it. It's kind of like a little bit of a reference book, which is
It is.
Whatever issue you're working on, because not all people have hot flashes, or not all people have night sweats, whatever it might be. But you can thumb to your chapter. There's 50 of them. Find out what to do about that symptom, and it's the short term and the long term. And I like how you put them into the categories also. So it's what is it? It's perimenopause, and then menopause, and then postmenopause.
So it'd be like it'd be like the 10 years preceding menopause, the first 10 years of menopause, and all the years and decades thereafter.
Well, we'll talk about it some more in our Facebook group, and we'll do some promotions around it. But I thank you so much. Big hug from Park City, and enjoy, and thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Oh my God, it was such a pleasure having Felice on the show today. Now, my big takeaway is that whether you choose to take hormones or not, healthy living can dramatically improve your menopausal experience. Exercise, sleep, stress reduction, and a plant-focused diet helps your body function properly. On the other hand, smoking, excessive alcohol, a sedentary lifestyle, stress, pollution, it all makes it worse. Her book is full of strategies to help you eliminate menopausal symptoms and maintain your heart health, strong body, strong brain, and increase muscle mass. Now, where do you get it? Well, the name of the book, once again, is Menopause, 50 Things You Need to Know, and you can get it just about anywhere you find books. I found it on Amazon. That's probably my best bet for you. But you can find it also on her website, integrativemgi.com. Once again, integrativemgi.com. Now, I want to give a big shout out to all the folks listening from Fit Over 40 Facebook. Hi, everyone. Now, if you don't know about Fit Over 40, it's a free program you can join at kathysmith.com. I love the Fit Over 40 group. We have a great group of women that are just supporting each other through all of these different stages of our lives. And the Fit Over 40 program, which is free, as I mentioned, gives you 14 days of free strength training and Pilates and bar method and cardio. So come check us out. You will not regret it. If you enjoyed this episode, guess what? There's more. All you have to do is go to wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you can see amazing things about how you stop procrastinating. You can check out Patrick Porter's episode number 94, Procrastination's Your Big Thing. If strength training, how to maintain muscle mass, is something that you're dealing with, then don't forget or check out Wayne Westcott's podcast. Or if you want to learn about supplements that everyone over 40 needs to know about, listen to Sean Wells, and I think that's episode number 74. So the podcast is available on all platforms. Just search The Art of Living, whether you're on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, and you'll find all these episodes. You can even say, "Hey Siri, play the Kathy Smith podcast," and she'll play it. She'll play the latest episode for you. And while you're at it, don't forget to leave a review. Now, I have to say, I love doing podcasts. I don't know if most people know this, but it is a labor of love. And part of what keeps me going, keeps the podcast going, is for you guys to shout out and give a good review and tell your friends about it. So for everybody who left a review, thank you. I love reading them. And until next time, here's to your health. Bye-bye.